The gunshot cracked through the valley before dawn, and Dante Morty did not flinch. He had heard worse. He had caused worse. By the time his car reached the iron gates of his countryside estate, the sun was rising over the hills, and his shirt was still stained at the collar from a night he wanted to forget. He walked past his men without a word. No one dared stop him. His jaw was tight, his eyes distant, and every step carried the weight of decisions that had cost lives. 3 of his own had died in the territory dispute. 2 more were missing. He had not slept in 2 days, and he did not plan to sleep now either. He only wanted silence. The garden behind the estate was the one place his men rarely followed him. Rows of white roses lined the stone path, and at the far end stood an old oak tree, its branches thick and low, casting a wide pool of shade on the grass. Dante walked to it and lowered himself onto the ground, resting his back against the trunk. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to disappear for a moment from the version of himself that gave orders to kill. He did not hear the small footsteps at first. A boy, no older than 3, came running across the lawn with a wooden toy horse clutched in one hand. His curls bounced with every step, and his laughter was loud and free, the kind of laughter that belonged to a world untouched by fear. He stopped when he saw the man under the tree, tilted his head, and studied him the way children study things they do not yet understand to be dangerous. Dante heard the boy approach but kept his eyes shut. He assumed it was some passing moment, a child who would run off the second an adult called him back. Instead, small hands gripped the fabric of his shirt, and before he could react, the boy had climbed onto his chest and settled there, as if Dante were nothing more than a soft patch of grass. For a long second, Dante did not move. His body, trained to react to every threat with lethal precision, went completely still. He did not open his eyes. He did not push the boy away. Something in him, some part buried so deep he had forgotten it existed, told him to simply let it happen. The boy patted his chest twice, satisfied, and rested his head down as if settling in for a nap of his own. That was when the panicked voice cut through the quiet. "Milo!" A woman came running across the garden, her apron still tied around her waist, a basket of linens forgotten on the grass behind her. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its pin, and her face had drained of color the moment she saw where her son was sitting. She skidded to a stop a few feet away, her chest rising and falling fast, her hands trembling as she reached out. "Milo, come here right now," she said, her voice shaking. "Come here, sweetheart, please." The boy blinked up at her, confused by her fear. Dante finally opened his eyes. The woman froze the instant their gazes met. She knew exactly who he was. Everyone on the estate knew. Dante Morty did not tolerate mistakes, and letting her toddler climb onto him while he rested was the kind of mistake that could end a career, or worse. "I am so sorry," she said quickly, scooping Milo into her arms before Dante could say a word. "He just started walking a few weeks ago, and he does not understand boundaries yet, and I only turned my back for a moment. I promise it will not happen again. Stop." The single word silenced her instantly. Dante sat up slowly, studying her the way he studied everyone, searching for a lie, a threat, a reason to be angry. He found none. Only fear, raw and immediate, radiating from a woman trying to protect her child. "What is your name?" he asked. Her throat worked before the words came out. "Lucia." "Lucia Bennett. I started 3 weeks ago, working in the East Wing. I cleaned the linens and helped with the kitchen staff. I did not know you would be out here. I thought you were still." "I asked your name, not your resume." Lucia pressed her lips together, holding Milo tighter against her hip. The boy squirmed, reaching one small hand back toward Dante, entirely unaware of the tension suffocating the air around him. Dante rose to his feet, brushing grass from his trousers. He was taller than she remembered noticing, broader, the kind of presence that filled a room simply by entering it. His dark eyes moved from her face to the boy in her arms, lingering there a moment longer than necessary. "He is not afraid of me," Dante said almost to himself. "He is not afraid of anyone," Lucia answered before she could stop herself. Then she flinched as if the honesty had slipped out against her will. "I mean no disrespect, sir. I will keep him inside from now on. He will not bother you again." Dante studied her for a long moment. Behind him, two of his men appeared at the garden entrance, drawn by the sound of raised voices, their hands instinctively moving toward their jackets when they spotted the unfamiliar woman. Dante lifted a hand without turning around, and they stopped where they stood, waiting. "Go back to your work," Dante said to Lucia, his voice flat again, the brief crack in his composure sealed shut. "This did not happen." Lucia nodded quickly, murmuring another apology before turning and hurrying back across the lawn, Milo bouncing against her hip. His wooden horse dropped somewhere in the grass behind them. She did not look back. She could not afford to. In her world, men like Dante Morty did not offer second chances, and she had already used whatever grace he was willing to give. She made it to the laundry room before her hands began to shake uncontrollably. She set Milo down on a folded blanket in the corner, out of the way of the hot irons and heavy baskets, and pressed her palms against the counter to steady herself. "You cannot do that again," she whispered to him, though she knew he did not understand. "You cannot go near him. Do you understand me?" "Never again." Milo only smiled up at her, unaware that his mother's heart was still hammering from the fear of what could have happened. Fear of losing her position. Fear of what men like Dante Morty did to people who inconvenienced them. She had heard the stories whispered among the staff, stories of disappearances, of debts paid in blood, of a man who ruled his world with a coldness that made even seasoned criminals nervous. She had taken this job because it was far from the city, far from the life she had escaped, far from a man who had once raised his hand to her more times than she could count. The pay was good, the estate was quiet, and she had believed, foolishly perhaps, that keeping her head down and her son close would be enough to stay invisible. Now Dante Morty knew her name. Across the garden, Dante remained standing beneath the oak tree long after Lucia had disappeared into the house. His men waited by the entrance, unsure whether to approach. He was not thinking about the territory dispute anymore, or the men he had lost, or the retaliation he would need to plan before the week's end. He was thinking about the weight of a small body settling against his chest without hesitation, without fear, as if he were simply a man and nothing more. It had been years since anyone looked at him that way. He bent down and picked up the wooden horse from the grass, turning it over in his hands. The paint was chipped, the mane roughly carved, clearly the work of someone without much money but with a great deal of care. He held it for a moment longer than he intended before slipping it into his coat pocket and walking back toward the house, his expression unreadable once more. Inside, his second in command, a broad-shouldered man named Nico Falco, was waiting in the study with a folder of reports spread across the desk. He straightened when Dante entered, his eyes flicking briefly toward the garden windows. "The families in the East Territory are asking for a meeting," Nico said. "They want assurances that last night will not happen again, and the Rixai family sent a message an hour ago. They are not happy about the losses." Dante sat behind the desk, his fingers drumming once against the wood before going still. "Set up the meeting for tomorrow. And find out everything you can about the Rixai movements this past month. I want to know who gave the order before I decide how to respond." "Understood." Nico gathered the folder but hesitated at the door. "There was a woman in the garden. Grazia mentioned it to me. Is there a problem?" Dante's expression did not change. "No problem, a misunderstanding, it is handled." Nico nodded, though something in his eyes suggested he did not entirely believe it, and left the room without another word. Alone again, Dante reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the wooden horse, setting it on the desk in front of him. He stared at it for a long time, longer than a man in his position should have spared for something so small and insignificant. Outside, the sun climbed higher over the hills, and somewhere in the house, he could hear the faint sound of a child laughing, carried on the morning air like something he had almost forgotten how to recognize. He did not know it yet, but the quiet, careful life he had built for himself, the walls he had spent years constructing to keep every soft thing out, had already begun to crack the moment a boy with no fear in his heart climbed onto his chest and decided, without asking permission, that he was safe. Later that evening, Lucia stood at the window of the small staff quarters she shared with Milo, watching the last light fade behind the hills. Milo was asleep in his small bed, his chest rising and falling steadily, his hand curled loosely around a blanket. She thought of the wooden horse, missing from where she had dropped it, and wondered if she should ask someone about it or simply let it go, another small loss in a life that had already asked her to give up so much. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find one of the household staff, an older woman named Greta who oversaw the kitchen, holding out the wooden horse wrapped carefully in a cloth. "This was left outside your door," Greta said, her eyes curious but her tone careful. "Someone must have found it and brought it back." Lucia took it slowly, her fingers brushing the chipped paint, the roughly carved mane. She thought of dark eyes studying her across the garden, of a voice that had gone quiet the moment it noticed her son was not afraid. She closed the door and set the horse on the small table beside Milo's bed, her mind spinning with questions she did not dare voice aloud. Why would a man like Dante Morty bother returning a broken toy? Why would he go quiet instead of angry when her son treated him like nothing more than a resting place in the grass? She did not have answers. She only knew, as she finally lay down to sleep that night, that something had shifted, quietly and without permission, and that the careful, invisible life she had built for herself and her son might not stay so simple for very much longer. The next morning came too soon. Lucia rose before the sun, as she always did, dressing quietly so she would not wake Milo. She had learned in her 3 weeks at the estate that the household ran on strict routine, and any deviation drew attention she could not afford. Breakfast for the staff was served at 5:30 in the small dining hall behind the kitchen, and she liked to be among the first to arrive, finish quickly, and disappear back into her work before anyone noticed her. That morning, the kitchen was already buzzing with quiet gossip. 2 of the younger maids stood near the stove, their voices low but urgent, and Lucia caught fragments of their conversation as she passed. "He was sitting under the tree with his eyes closed," one of them whispered. "Grazia said he did not even yell, he just told her to leave." "That does not sound like him at all," the other replied. "Last month he fired a man for spilling wine on his jacket, and now a child crawls all over him and nothing happens." Lucia kept her head down and moved past them quickly, her cheeks warm with embarrassment. She had hoped the incident would be forgotten within a day, but clearly the staff found it too strange to let go so easily. She filled a small plate with bread and fruit, ate standing at the counter, and hurried back to check on Milo before her shift officially began. Greta found her in the hallway a short while later, a stack of fresh linens balanced in her arms. "You are the talk of the house this morning," Greta said, not unkindly. "I would be careful if I were you. Men like him do not usually explain themselves, and when the staff starts whispering, it rarely ends well for the person at the center of the story." "I did not ask for any of this," Lucia said, taking half the linens to ease the older woman's load. "I only want to do my work and take care of my son. I have no interest in being anyone's story." Greta studied her for a moment, something like sympathy crossing her weathered face. "I believe you, but belief does not always matter in a house like this. Just watch yourself and watch that boy of yours. Curiosity has a way of leading small feet into places they should not go." The warning settled heavily in Lucia's chest, as she carried the linens toward the east wing. She thought of the wooden horse waiting on the table beside Milo's bed, of dark eyes that had studied her with something other than anger, and wondered again what kind of man Dante Morty truly was beneath the fear his name inspired. She did not have to wonder long. Later that afternoon, while she was hanging linens to dry in the side courtyard, she heard the low rumble of a car engine and the sound of raised voices near the front gate. She set down her basket and moved instinctively toward the sound, a habit left over from years of learning to read danger before it reached her. 2 black cars had pulled up outside the estate, and men she did not recognize stepped out, their expressions hard, their hands resting near their jackets in a way that made her stomach tighten. Nico Falco appeared on the front steps, flanked by 2 of Dante's men, and a tense exchange followed, too quiet for her to hear clearly, but tense enough that she felt the danger radiating across the courtyard like heat from a fire. She hurried back inside, pulling the courtyard door shut behind her, and went straight to find Milo, who was playing quietly in the corner of the laundry room under the watch of another maid. She scooped him into her arms despite his protest, holding him close, her heart pounding with a fear she recognized too well. This was the world she had brought her son into, a world of black cars and hard voices and men who solved their problems with violence. She had told herself the estate was safe, that its isolation would protect them, but watching those men step out of their cars with such casual menace reminded her how naive that hope had been. By evening, the tension in the house had not fully faded, though the visitors had gone. Dante remained locked in his study for hours, and the staff moved through their duties with unusual quiet, as if speaking too loudly might draw unwanted attention. Lucia kept Milo close all evening, resisting the urge to take him outside for even a moment of fresh air. It was near sunset when she finally allowed herself to breathe. Milo had eaten his dinner and was playing with the wooden horse on the floor of their small room, walking it in slow circles across the wooden planks and murmuring quiet nonsense to himself. Lucia sat nearby, mending a torn seam in one of the household uniforms, her needle moving in practiced rhythm. A soft knock came at the door. She opened it to find Nico Falco standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable, a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Mr. Morty wants you to have tomorrow morning off," Nico said, holding out the paper. "Full pay. He says the boy should have space to play without worrying about where he wanders." Lucia stared at the paper, too stunned to take it right away. "I do not understand." "I thought I was in trouble." "So did I," Nico admitted, a faint, almost amused look crossing his face. "But he was very clear about it. Take the morning, Miss Bennet. Do not question it too much." He turned and walked back down the hallway before she could respond, leaving her standing in the doorway with the paper still in her hand and 1,000 new questions crowding her mind. She closed the door and looked down at Milo, still walking his wooden horse across the floor, entirely unaware of the strange currents shifting around him. Whatever Dante Morty was, whatever reputation preceded him through every room of this house, he had just done something that made no sense within the rules she thought she understood. She did not know whether to feel relieved or more afraid than ever. All she knew, as she finally settled down for the night with Milo curled against her side, was that the quiet, invisible life she had hoped to build here had already begun to change, and there was no way to predict where it would lead them next. The scream came from the stable at dawn, sharp and sudden, cutting through the morning mist before anyone could react. Lucia dropped the basket of eggs she was carrying and ran, her heart slamming against her ribs, certain in that instant that something had happened to Milo. It was only a stable hand, thrown from a startled horse, clutching his arm and cursing through gritted teeth. Lucia exhaled, pressing a hand to her chest, embarrassed by how quickly panic had taken hold of her. But the fear lingered, coiled tight in her stomach, a reminder of how fragile the peace around her truly was. 3 days had passed since Dante had given her the morning off, and in that time the strange quiet between them had settled into something Lucia did not know how to name. She saw him occasionally, crossing the courtyard, standing at his study window, always distant, always unreadable. He never spoke to her directly, yet small things kept happening that told her he had not forgotten the moment under the oak tree. Extra fruit appeared in the kitchen, specifically the kind Milo liked best. A soft blanket, far finer than anything the staff quarters usually provided, arrived folded at the foot of Milo's bed with no note attached. When one of the maids complained that the boy's laughter during his afternoon play was too loud near the study windows, Nico Falco quietly informed her that Mr. Morty had said the noise did not bother him. Lucia told herself these were small things, easily explained, the kindness of a busy man distracted by larger matters. She told herself this even as her mind returned again and again to the memory of dark eyes softening for just a moment beneath the oak tree. Milo, for his part, showed no such hesitation. He had taken to slipping away from his afternoon naps to wander the garden, and more often than not, Lucia found him near the study, standing on his toes to peer through the glass, calling out a name of his own invention. "Uncle Dan," he would say, patting the window with his small palm, entirely unbothered by the fact that the man inside rarely acknowledged him. Except sometimes he did. Lucia arrived one afternoon to collect her son and found the study door cracked open, Milo seated on the floor just inside, stacking wooden blocks into an uneven tower while Dante sat behind his desk, a phone pressed to his ear, his eyes occasionally flicking down toward the boy with an expression Lucia could not quite place. It was not warmth, not exactly. It was something more careful than that, like a man watching something he did not trust himself to want. She scooped Milo up quickly, apologizing before Dante could even end his call, but he waved a hand toward the door without looking up, a silent signal that no apology was needed. She left quickly, her pulse unsteady, unsure what unsettled her more, the fact that her son had wandered so easily into a dangerous man's private space, or the fact that the dangerous man had let him stay. That evening, after Milo had fallen asleep, Lucia sat by the small window of their room, staring out at the darkened garden, and allowed herself, for the first time, to think honestly about the fragments of her past that had brought her here. She had grown up in a modest home outside the city, raised by a mother who worked long hours and a father who left before she turned 10. She had met Milo's father, a man named Callum, when she was 20, charming and attentive in the beginning, the kind of man who made her feel seen for the first time in years. It had taken nearly 2 years for the charm to fade into something cruel, something that left bruises she learned to hide beneath long sleeves and quiet smiles. She had left the night she realized Callum's temper was no longer confined to her. Milo had been barely a year old, and the sound of his father's raised voice near his crib had been the final warning she needed. She had packed a single bag, taken what little money she had saved in secret, and boarded a bus with no destination beyond away. The estate had found her through a placement agency that did not ask too many questions, a quality she had been grateful for at the time. She had not known, walking through the front gates for the first time, that she was trading one kind of danger for another. She had only known that the pay was steady, the room was warm, and no one here knew enough about her to hurt her the way Callum had. Now, watching her son grow attached to a man whose name alone made grown adults nervous, she wondered if she had simply exchanged one storm for another, quieter one, waiting patiently to break. The following morning brought new tension to the estate. Lucia was folding linens in the hallway near the study when she overheard Nico's voice, low and urgent, through the partially open door. "The Rixai family is not backing down," Nico said. "They believe you are distracted, that the losses last month made you soft. If they see weakness, they will push harder." "Let them push," Dante replied, his voice cold and even. "I have handled worse than the Rixes." It is not just the Rixus I am worried about, Nico continued, his tone dropping further, forcing Lucia to lean closer despite herself. The men are talking about the maid, about the boy. Some of them think it is strange, you letting a child wander freely through your private rooms. Strange is dangerous in this business. You know that better than anyone. There was a long pause before Dante answered. Are you finished? I am only saying what needs to be said. Then you have said it. Now leave it alone. Lucia moved quickly away from the door before either man could catch her listening, her hands trembling as she gathered the last of the linens. She had suspected the staff, noticed the small attentions Dante paid toward her son, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that even his own men saw it as a weakness worth exploiting, filled her with a fear sharper than anything she had felt since arriving at the estate. She spent the rest of the day distracted, jumping at every unfamiliar sound, watching Milo with an intensity that left her exhausted by evening. She began to consider, quietly and reluctantly, whether it might be safer to request a transfer to a different household, one where her son's presence would not draw the kind of attention that seemed to follow danger wherever it went. She never got the chance to act on the thought. That night a commotion woke the household near midnight. Shouting voices, the sound of a car engine roaring up the front drive far too fast, followed by the sharp clatter of something heavy hitting the gravel. Lucia sat up instantly, gathering Milo against her chest before she was even fully awake, her instincts sharpened by years of learning to move quickly when danger arrived without warning. She peered through the small window of their room and saw men running across the courtyard, weapons drawn, shouting instructions to one another in clipped, urgent tones. A car had crashed through part of the front gate, and figures were spilling out of it, some of them clearly injured, others moving with the swift, purposeful violence of men prepared for a fight. Her breath caught in her throat. This was not a rival family sending a warning. This was an attack. She backed away from the window, pulling the curtain shut, and pressed herself against the wall with Milo held tightly against her chest, his small body trembling now, sensing his mother's fear even if he could not understand its cause. She thought of the small, locked door at the back of the staff quarters. The one Greta had once mentioned led to a hidden cellar beneath the kitchen, built generations ago for reasons no one fully remembered. She moved toward it without hesitation, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor, Milo's face buried against her shoulder as she whispered soft, steady reassurances she did not entirely believe herself. Outside, the sound of gunfire cracked through the night, followed by shouting voices and the heavy thud of footsteps running past her door. She reached the hidden door just as it swung open from the other side, and she nearly screamed before recognizing the face in front of her. Dante stood in the narrow passage, a weapon in one hand, blood on his knuckles though not, she quickly realized, his own. His eyes found hers in the darkness, and for the first time since the morning under the oak tree, she saw something other than cold control in his expression. She saw urgency. She saw, unmistakably, fear not for himself, but for the two people standing in front of him. "Down here now," he said, his voice low but firm, stepping aside to let her pass into the cellar. "You will be safe here. Do not come out until Nico or I come for you personally. Do you understand?" Lucia nodded quickly, moving past him into the dark, narrow space, her arms still wrapped tightly around her son. She turned back once, just as Dante prepared to pull the door shut behind her, and found herself asking the question before she could stop it. "Why are you protecting us?" Dante paused, his hand resting on the edge of the door, his expression caught somewhere between the ruthless man the world feared and something far more uncertain underneath. He did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost lost beneath the chaos still echoing through the house above them. "Because for the first time in a long time, I have something worth protecting." The door closed before she could respond, sealing her and Milo in the safety of the dark, while above them, The sound of gunfire and shouting continued to tear through the quiet night Dante had built so carefully to keep the world, and everyone soft enough to survive in it, at a careful distance. The cellar was cold and smelled faintly of old stone and stored grain. Lucia sat on an overturned crate, Milo curled against her lap, his small fingers gripping the fabric of her nightgown as the muffled sounds of chaos continued somewhere above them. She counted his breaths to steady her own, whispering an old lullaby her mother used to sing, though her voice shook too badly to hold the tune for long. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The gunfire slowed, then stopped altogether, replaced by the low murmur of voices and the occasional shout of instruction. She strained to hear anything that might tell her what was happening, whether the attack had been repelled, or whether the silence simply meant something far worse. Milo, exhausted from fear, eventually drifted into a fitful sleep against her shoulder, and she held him without moving, afraid that even the smallest sound might draw danger toward the hidden door. It was nearly an hour before she heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, followed by 3 soft knocks in a pattern she recognized from Dante's earlier instructions. She rose carefully, shifting Milo's weight against her hip, and pulled the door open to find Nico standing there, his shirt torn at the shoulder, a shallow cut above his brow. "It is over," he said quietly. "You are safe now. Mr. Morty wants to see that you and the boy are unharmed." She followed him up the narrow stairs and through the kitchen, stepping carefully around overturned chairs and a shattered vase near the hallway entrance. The estate bore the marks of the attack everywhere: broken glass, scorched wood near the front entrance, the acrid smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air. Staff members moved quietly through the wreckage, some tending to minor injuries, others simply standing in stunned silence, taking in the damage done to a house that had always felt, until tonight, impossibly secure. She found Dante in the front hall, speaking in low, clipped tones to 2 of his men, his jacket discarded somewhere, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a fresh cut visible along his forearm that no one seemed to be tending to. He turned the moment he sensed her approach, and something in his shoulders eased slightly at the sight of Milo still sleeping peacefully against her chest. "You are both unharmed," he said, more statement than question. "We are fine," Lucia answered, though her voice still carried a tremor she could not fully hide. "What happened?" "Who were they?" Dante's expression hardened. "Men sent by a family that no longer exists as of tonight. They will not be sending anyone else." The finality in his voice left no room for further questions, and Lucia did not press. She understood, in the careful way one learns to understand the unspoken rules of dangerous men, that some answers were not meant to be given, only accepted. "Nico will show you to a room in the main house for tonight," Dante continued. "Your quarters took damage in the attack. It is not safe until repairs are made." Lucia hesitated, glancing toward the staff wing where smoke still curled faintly from a broken window near the laundry room. She had not realized how close the danger had come to where she and Milo slept every night. Her stomach turned at the thought of what might have happened had Dante not reached them in time. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words feeling insufficient for what he had done, "for coming for us. You did not have to." Something flickered across his face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "Get some rest, Miss Bennet. We will speak more in the morning." The room Nico led her to was larger than anything she had slept in for years, with soft linens and a window overlooking the garden where the oak tree stood, untouched by the night's violence. She laid Milo down gently on the wide bed, tucking the blanket around him, and sat beside him for a long time, watching the rise and fall of his small chest, grateful beyond words that he had slept through most of the danger without truly understanding how close it had come. Sleep did not find her easily. Every creak of the old house sent her pulse racing, every distant voice pulling her back to full alertness. She thought of Dante's words through the cellar door, the quiet admission that had slipped free in a moment of urgency. Because for the first time in a long time, I have something worth protecting. She turned the words over in her mind, searching for their true meaning, uncertain whether they frightened her more than the gunfire had, or whether they had settled something in her chest she did not yet have language for. Morning arrived gray and quiet, the household moving carefully around the damage from the night before. Lucia woke to find a tray of breakfast waiting outside her door, along with a change of clothes for both herself and Milo, folded neatly and clearly new. She dressed her son, who woke with none of the fear that had gripped him the night before, already asking about his wooden horse and whether he could go outside to play. She kept him close that morning, unwilling to let him wander far, though the estate had returned to a strange semblance of order. Workers were already repairing the front gate, sweeping shattered glass from the hallway, replacing scorched wood near the entrance. It was as if the household had rehearsed this exact recovery before, a grim thought that reminded her once again of the world she had unknowingly stepped into. She found Dante later that morning in the garden, standing near the oak tree, staring out toward the hills with an expression more tired than she had ever seen on him. He did not turn when she approached, though he clearly heard her footsteps against the grass. "I owe you an explanation," he said quietly before she could speak. "Not for last night, for all of it, the fruit in the kitchen, the blanket for the boy. Letting him sit in my study, when he should have been napping like every other child his age." Lucia said nothing, waiting, sensing that whatever came next mattered more than anything he had said to her before. "I had a wife once," he continued, his voice low, each word carefully measured, as if speaking them cost him something. "And a daughter, before all of this, before I became the man everyone in this house is afraid of." Lucia's breath caught, understanding settling over her slowly, painfully, as she realized the weight behind every small kindness he had shown her son. "I am sorry," she whispered. Dante finally turned to look at her, his eyes carrying a grief so old and so carefully buried that it startled her to see its surface, even briefly in the morning light. "Your son does not know to be afraid of me," he said. "For a long time I forgot what that felt like. I am not sure I know how to stop wanting to feel it again." Neither of them spoke for a long moment, the quiet between them heavier now, filled with things neither was ready to name aloud. Somewhere behind them, near the house, Milo's laughter carried across the garden, bright and untroubled, entirely unaware of the fragile, dangerous thing beginning to take root between the two adults who had, until 3 weeks ago, been strangers to one another in every way that mattered. A week after the attack, Lucia found a folded note tucked beneath her door, unsigned, warning her in plain, blunt words that the house was no longer safe for people who did not belong to the family business. She read it twice before tearing it into small pieces and burying them at the bottom of the kitchen bin, her hands steady even as her mind raced through every possible person who might have left it. She did not tell Dante. She told herself it was a stray threat, the kind of thing bitter staff sometimes wrote when jealousy or fear got the better of them. She did not want to add more weight to a situation already balancing precariously on the edge of something she could not fully name. Life at the estate had settled into an uneasy rhythm since the attack. Repairs to the front gate and staff wing were complete, though the memory of that night lingered in the careful way everyone moved through the halls, the way conversations dropped to whispers whenever Dante passed by. Lucia and Milo had been moved permanently into a larger room in the main house, closer to Dante's private wing, a decision he had made without asking her opinion, and one she had not argued against. Milo, blissfully unaware of notes and threats and the careful tension holding the household together, had grown even bolder in his affection for Dante. He greeted him each morning at breakfast with an enthusiastic wave, insisted on showing him every drawing he scribbled during the day, and had taken to falling asleep some evenings in the study, curled on the small couch near the window while Dante worked through reports at his desk. Dante, for his part, had stopped pretending the attachment did not exist. He no longer waved Lucia away with vague excuses when she came to collect her son from his study. He asked, instead, small questions about her day, about Milo's favorite foods, about whether the boy preferred the garden or the library for his afternoon play. The questions were simple, but they carried a weight neither of them acknowledged directly, a slow unraveling of the distance both had worked so hard to maintain. It was on a quiet afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after the attack, that the fragile peace shattered again. Lucia had taken Milo to the garden to enjoy the mild weather, settling near the oak tree with a blanket spread across the grass, while he chased a small ball back and forth, his laughter ringing bright against the quiet afternoon. She was watching him, half distracted by her own thoughts, when a shadow moved along the far wall of the estate, near the section of the property that bordered the wooded hills beyond. She dismissed it at first, assuming it was one of the groundskeepers, but something in the way the figure moved, low and deliberate, hugging close to the wall instead of walking openly across the grounds, sent a familiar chill through her chest. "Milo, come here," she called, keeping her voice light despite the fear tightening in her throat. Milo, absorbed in his game, did not immediately respond, chasing the ball closer to the wall where the shadow had disappeared. Lucia rose quickly, moving toward him, when the sharp crack of a gunshot split the afternoon quiet, striking the trunk of the oak tree only a few feet from where Milo stood frozen, the ball forgotten in his hand. Everything after that happened in a blur of motion and sound. Lucia screamed her son's name, sprinting across the grass, scooping him into her arms just as a second shot rang out, closer this time, kicking up dirt near her feet. She dropped to the ground instinctively, curling her body around Milo, shielding him with everything she had, waiting for a third shot that felt certain to come. It never did. Instead, she heard the thunder of footsteps, and a voice she recognized immediately, sharp with fury and fear in equal measure. "Down, stay down." Dante emerged from the direction of the house, weapon already drawn, moving with a speed and precision that left no doubt about the years of violence that had shaped him. He fired twice toward the wall where the shadow had vanished, and a strangled cry followed, confirming the shots had found their mark. 2 more of his men appeared moments later, fanning out along the property line, securing the area with swift, practiced efficiency. Lucia remained curled around Milo in the grass, her whole body shaking, until Dante reached them and dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly, as if unsure whether he had the right to touch either of them. "Are you hurt?" His voice, usually so controlled, cracked slightly at the edges. "Lucia, look at me. Are either of you hurt?" It was the first time he had used her first name. She shook her head, unable to speak yet, her arms still locked tightly around Milo, who had begun to cry, more from the sudden noise and fear in the air than any real understanding of what had happened. Dante reached out then, resting a hand gently against the boy's back, an oddly tender gesture from a man who, moments earlier, had fired his weapon without hesitation. "You are safe," he said, his voice steadier now, though his eyes remained sharp, scanning the property line for any further threat. "You are both safe, I promise you." Nico arrived a few minutes later, confirming that the intruder had been dealt with, his men already searching the wooded area beyond the wall for signs of accomplices. Dante helped Lucia to her feet, one hand supporting her elbow, the other still resting protectively near Milo, and guided them both quickly back toward the house, away from the open grounds. Inside, the household staff moved with hushed urgency, securing windows and doors, while Nico briefed Dante in low, rapid tones about what little information they had gathered. Lucia sat in the front hall with Milo held tightly in her lap, her mind still reeling from how close the danger had come, how easily her son could have been the one struck instead of the tree behind him. When Dante finally returned to check on them, the household had quieted, the immediate danger contained, though the tension in the air remained thick and unresolved. He knelt in front of where she sat, his expression grave, the earlier crack in his composure sealed shut once more, replaced by the controlled intensity she had come to recognize as his default state. "That was not a random attack," he said quietly. "That was the Rixai family testing how far they are willing to go. They know about you, about Milo. They are trying to find a weakness they can exploit." Lucia's stomach turned cold. "Because of me, because you have shown that you care what happens to us." Dante did not deny it. "I will not apologize for that, but I need you to understand what it means, moving forward. You are not just staff on this estate anymore, whether either of us intended that or not. You are a target." The word hung heavy in the air between them, confirming every fear Lucia had carried since the night of the first attack, since the moment Nico's warning through the study door had reached her ears. She held Milo a little tighter, torn between the instinct to run far from this danger and the strange, undeniable pull keeping her rooted in place. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. Dante was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that felt like it reached far deeper than the question itself. "I want you to stay," he said finally, his voice quiet but certain. "I know that is selfish of me to ask, given everything it puts you at risk of. But I have spent years building walls around myself so nothing could ever touch me again, and in 3 weeks, your son knocked half of them down without even trying. I am not ready to lose that. I am not ready to lose either of you." Lucia's throat tightened, emotion rising faster than she could control it. She thought of Callum, of the fear that had once defined every corner of her life, and wondered whether trusting a man capable of the violence she had witnessed today was wisdom or foolishness. Yet sitting there, watching the raw honesty in Dante's expression, she found herself believing, against every instinct that told her to be cautious, that this was a different kind of danger altogether, one built not on cruelty, but on a desperate, unfamiliar desire to protect rather than control. "I am afraid," she admitted quietly, "not just of the men outside these walls, of what it means to let myself trust someone again." "I understand that fear better than you know," Dante said. "I am not asking you to trust me blindly. I am asking you to let me prove, over time, that I am not the danger you should be afraid of." Milo, sensing the shift in the conversation, reached one small hand toward Dante's face, patting his cheek gently the way he often did, entirely unaware of the weight carried in the silence surrounding them. Dante closed his eyes briefly at the touch, something raw and unguarded crossing his features before he composed himself once more. "We will increase security around the estate," he said, rising to his feet, the moment of vulnerability folding back beneath his usual composed authority. "You will not go anywhere without protection from now on, and neither will he. I will not let what almost happened today happen again." Lucia nodded, watching him walk away to coordinate with his men, her heart still racing from the danger of the afternoon, but steadied, unexpectedly, by the certainty in his voice. She did not know what the coming days would bring, whether the Rixai family would strike again, or whether the fragile trust building between herself and Dante would survive the storm gathering around them. She only knew, holding her son close in the quiet aftermath of violence, that there was no simple path forward anymore, only the difficult, uncertain choice of whether to run from the danger or stand and face it beside the one man who had, against every expectation, chosen to fight for them both. That night, after Milo had finally settled into an exhausted sleep, Lucia found herself unable to rest, her mind circling back again and again to the sound of gunfire cracking against the oak tree, to the terrifying certainty that she might have lost her son in the space of a single breath. She rose quietly, careful not to wake him, and made her way down the darkened hallway toward the kitchen, hoping a cup of warm tea might steady her nerves enough to finally sleep. She found Dante there instead, sitting alone at the long wooden table, a glass of untouched whiskey in front of him, his shirt still faintly marked with dust from the garden. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the events of the afternoon still hanging heavy between them. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "So should you," she replied, moving to fill the kettle despite the late hour. "I could not sleep. I keep hearing it, the gunshot, how close it came to the tree." Dante's jaw tightened. "It came closer to him than I am willing to think about." She turned to look at him properly then, taking in the exhaustion etched into his face, the way his hands, usually so steady, curled tightly around the glass in front of him. This was not the same man who had walked past his own men without a word on the morning she first saw him beneath the oak tree. Something in him had cracked open, and she was not entirely sure he knew how to close it again, even if he wanted to. "Tell me about her," Lucia said softly, taking the seat across from him. "Your daughter. If you want to." For a long moment she thought he might refuse, might retreat back behind the careful walls he had built so effectively over the years. Instead, he let out a slow breath and began to speak, his voice quiet, measured, each word chosen with the care of a man handling something fragile. "Her name was Bianca," he said. "She would have been about Milo's age now if things had gone differently. My wife, Elena, and I were still building this life when it happened. A rival family targeted us, back before I had the power or the protection I have now. They came for me and found my family instead." Lucia's chest tightened with grief for a loss she could barely imagine. "I am so sorry." "I built everything after that to make sure it could never happen again," Dante continued. "The walls around this estate, the men who guard it, the reputation I let grow around my name, until even the most dangerous families in this business think twice before testing me. I told myself if I made everyone afraid enough, nothing soft would ever be vulnerable to me again, because there would be nothing soft left to lose." "And now?" Lucia asked quietly. Dante's eyes lifted to meet hers, something raw and unguarded in his expression. "Now a boy with no fear in his heart climbed onto my chest under that same kind of tree, and in one afternoon undid years of careful control. I do not know how to be the man I built myself into and still hold onto what I feel when I watch him laugh in that garden. I only know that today, when I heard that gunshot, I was more afraid than I have been since the night I lost Bianca." The kettle began to whistle behind her, and Lucia rose to remove it from the heat, grateful for a moment to steady her own breathing before she spoke again. She poured 2 cups instead of 1, sliding the second toward him without a word, a small gesture that felt, in the quiet of the kitchen, far more intimate than it should have. "I am afraid too," she admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Not just for Milo, for what it means, letting myself care about what happens to you. I spent years teaching myself not to trust men who carry violence as easily as you do. It is not a simple thing to unlearn." "I am not asking you to unlearn it overnight," Dante said. "I am only asking you not to run from it before you have seen whether it is worth staying for." They sat together in comfortable silence after that, the tension of the day slowly easing into something quieter, more fragile, but no less significant. When Lucia finally rose to return to her room, Dante walked her partway down the hallway, stopping just outside the door where Milo slept peacefully, undisturbed by the storm of danger and emotion that had passed through the house that day. "Thank you," she said softly, "for telling me about Bianca." Dante studied her for a long moment in the dim hallway light. "Thank you for asking instead of pretending you did not want to know." She slipped quietly into her room after that, checking on Milo one final time before finally allowing herself to rest, her heart still unsteady but no longer carrying quite the same weight of fear it had earlier that day. Outside, the estate settled into an uneasy quiet, guarded now by extra men stationed along every wall, while inside, 2 people who had spent years building separate fortresses around their hearts found themselves, slowly and against every careful instinct, beginning to lower the walls for one another. Morning brought a different kind of tension, one rooted not in danger from outside the walls, but in the changed atmosphere among the staff themselves. Word of the attack had spread quickly, along with quiet speculation about the way Dante had reacted, the way he had knelt in the grass beside a maid and her child, instead of simply ordering the area cleared and returning to his study as he might have done in the past. Grazia, one of the younger maids, approached Lucia in the hallway that morning, her expression a careful mix of curiosity and concern. "Everyone is talking about yesterday," she said quietly. "Not just the attack, about how he looked at you afterward. I have worked here 2 years, and I have never seen him kneel down for anyone." Lucia did not know how to respond, so she said nothing, focusing instead on the tray of linens in her arms. Grazia did not press further, though the knowing look in her eyes suggested the rest of the household had already reached their own conclusions. By midday, extra men had been stationed not just along the property walls, but within the house itself, their presence a constant, watchful reminder of how close danger had come. Lucia kept Milo indoors, though he protested loudly, missing his garden games and the wooden ball he had dropped in the grass the day before. She distracted him instead with quiet games in the library, grateful for the thick walls and heavy curtains that made the room feel, at least for a few hours, entirely separate from the danger simmering beyond it. Dante found them there in the early afternoon, standing quietly in the doorway for a moment before Milo spotted him and abandoned his toys entirely, running across the room with the same fearless enthusiasm he always showed. Dante knelt to catch him, lifting him easily into his arms, and Lucia watched the exchange with a tightness in her chest that had less to do with fear now and more to do with something far more difficult to name. "I spoke with my contacts this morning," Dante said, settling into the chair across from her, Milo still perched contentedly on his knee. "The Rixai family is regrouping, but they will not move again so quickly. We have time to prepare properly and time to make sure nothing like yesterday happens again." "And after that," Lucia asked, "when this is finally settled, whatever settled looks like in your world, what happens to us then?" Dante considered the question carefully, his hand resting lightly on Milo's back as the boy grew drowsy against his shoulder. "I do not have a clean answer for you," he admitted. "I only know that I do not want to imagine this house without either of you in it. Whatever comes next, I intend to make sure you are both part of it." It was not a promise wrapped in easy words or practiced charm, and Lucia found she trusted it more because of that. She watched him carry her sleeping son toward the small couch near the window, laying him down with a gentleness that still, after everything she had witnessed him capable of, managed to surprise her, and allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine a future built on something steadier than fear. The meeting behind closed doors had already been going on for over an hour when Lucia passed the study and heard voices raised in open disagreement, sharper and angrier than anything she had heard within these walls before. She slowed her steps, unable to stop herself from listening, though every instinct told her the conversation was not meant for her ears. "You are letting personal weakness cloud your judgment," a voice said, one Lucia recognized as belonging to Salvatore, one of Dante's senior lieutenants, a man with a reputation almost as fearsome as Dante's own. "The men respect strength. They respect control. What they see now is a boss distracted by a maid and her child, and distraction gets people killed in this business." "Careful," Dante's voice cut in, low and dangerous. "You forget who you are speaking to." "I forget nothing," Salvatore replied, undeterred. "I remember exactly who built this organization from nothing after the Rixas took everything from you the first time. I remember the man who taught us that attachment is a liability. I do not recognize the man kneeling in the grass over a servant's child." Lucia's stomach twisted painfully at the words, though she forced herself to keep moving, unwilling to be caught listening at the door. She retreated to the library, her hands trembling as she gathered Milo's scattered toys, her mind racing through the implications of what she had just overheard. Dante had men who disagreed with him, men who saw her and Milo not as people worth protecting, but as a dangerous liability threatening the stability of an organization built on fear and control. She had known, in some distant way, that her presence complicated things within the household. Hearing it spoken so bluntly, so close to outright rebellion, made the danger feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. That evening, Dante found her in the garden after Milo had gone to bed, standing near the oak tree with her arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. He approached slowly, sensing something had shifted in her mood since the morning. "You heard the meeting," he said quietly. "It was not a question." Lucia turned to face him, deciding there was no use pretending otherwise. "Salvatore does not think I belong here. He is not wrong to worry, is he? I am putting you in a difficult position with your own men." "Salvatore worries about many things," Dante said, though the tension in his jaw suggested the conversation had unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. "He is loyal, and he is not entirely wrong that attachment creates vulnerability in this business. But he does not decide how I choose to live my life, and he does not decide who stays in this house. That kind of confidence can create enemies within your own ranks," Lucia said softly. "I have seen what happens to men who grow too comfortable ignoring warnings from people close to them." Dante studied her for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his expression. "You are speaking from experience." "Callum, Milo's father, ignored every warning sign until it was too late for me to protect myself from what he became," Lucia said, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. "I am not saying Salvatore is right to threaten you. I am saying dismissed warnings have a way of becoming real dangers when no one is paying attention." Her words settled heavily between them, and Dante's expression grew thoughtful, though he said nothing further that evening beyond walking her back to the house and ensuring the extra guards remained stationed along every entrance. Over the following days, the tension within the household grew more pronounced, though it remained mostly hidden beneath the surface of daily routine. Lucia noticed Salvatore watching her more closely whenever their paths crossed, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes calculating in a way that made her skin prickle with unease. She kept Milo closer than ever, avoiding the parts of the estate where Salvatore's men tended to gather, unwilling to give anyone the opportunity to use her son as leverage against Dante. It was nearly a week later when Nico approached her privately in the kitchen, his expression grave, glancing over his shoulder before speaking in a low, urgent tone. "I need you to be careful," he said. "Salvatore has been meeting with 2 other lieutenants outside of official business hours. I do not know exactly what they are planning, but I know it involves questioning Dante's leadership, and I believe you and the boy are part of their argument against him." Lucia's blood ran cold. "Have you told Dante?" "Not yet. I do not have enough proof to make an accusation that's serious, not against men who have been loyal to this family for years. But I wanted you to know, so you can protect yourself and Milo if things move faster than expected." The warning settled over Lucia like a physical weight, following her through the rest of the day as she moved through her duties with a heightened awareness of every shadow, every unfamiliar footstep in the hallway. That evening, watching Milo play quietly on the floor of their room, she found herself seriously considering, for the first time since the conversation weeks ago, whether staying at the estate was truly the safest choice for her son. She raised the possibility to Dante the following morning, finding him alone in his study before the rest of the household had fully woken. "I think we should leave," she said quietly, before he could greet her properly. "Not forever, necessarily, but somewhere safer, at least until this tension with Salvatore resolves itself. I cannot keep Milo in a house where the men meant to protect him might see him as a problem to be removed." Dante's expression tightened, though he did not immediately argue against her. "Where would you go?" "I do not know," she admitted. "Somewhere far from all of this. Somewhere Milo can just be a little boy, without wondering whether the next attack will be aimed at him because of who his mother has grown close to." The silence that followed stretched long and heavy, Dante's jaw working as he considered her words carefully. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a rawness she had rarely heard from him. "If that is truly what you believe is safest, I will not stop you. I will arrange transportation money, whatever you need to start somewhere new. But I am asking you honestly to consider staying instead. Running does not always mean safety. Sometimes it only means trading one danger for a different, unfamiliar one." Lucia's throat tightened with the impossible weight of the decision before her. She thought of Callum, of the years spent running from one danger only to build a life in hiding, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the past to catch up with her. She thought of Milo's laughter in the garden, of the fierce, protective way Dante had shielded them both from gunfire without a moment's hesitation. "I'm not asking you to decide today," Dante continued, softer now. "But I need you to understand something. If Salvatore is planning something against my leadership, running will not necessarily keep you and Milo safe from the fallout. If he succeeds in destabilizing my position, there is no guarantee whoever takes control after me would honor any promise of safety I have made you. Staying close under my direct protection may actually be the safer path, difficult as that may be to accept." The logic of his words settled uncomfortably alongside her instinct to flee, creating a tangled knot of fear and uncertainty she did not know how to untangle cleanly. She left the study without giving him an answer, retreating instead to check on Milo, her mind spinning through possibilities that all seemed to lead toward the same impossible choice. 3 days later, the decision was made for her. She woke before dawn to the sound of raised voices in the hallway outside her room, followed by the unmistakable clatter of a struggle. She rose quickly, gathering Milo against her chest instinctively, and cracked the door open just enough to see 2 of Salvatore's men dragging Nico down the hallway, his hands bound, blood visible at his temple. "He knows too much," one of the men muttered to the other. "Salvatore wants him held until the vote is finished. If the other lieutenants back the move against Morty, Nico either joins us or he does not leave this house alive." Lucia pulled the door shut silently, her heart hammering against her ribs, understanding with sudden, terrifying clarity that whatever tension had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks had finally erupted into open betrayal. She looked down at Milo, wide awake now and sensing her fear, and made the only decision that felt possible in that moment. She had to find Dante, before Salvatore's rebellion consumed the entire household, and before the fragile safety they had built together collapsed entirely beneath the weight of an enemy that had been hiding, all along, within the very walls meant to protect them. Her hands shook as she pulled a coat over her nightgown and wrapped a thick blanket around Milo, who clung to her neck without complaint, sensing that this was not a moment for questions. She eased the door open again, checking both directions of the hallway before slipping out, her bare feet silent against the cold floor as she moved toward the private wing where Dante's bedroom stood at the far end. She had never gone there uninvited before, had always kept a careful, respectful distance from that part of the house, but tonight the old boundaries no longer mattered. She reached his door and knocked twice, low and urgent, praying he would hear it over whatever chaos might already be unfolding elsewhere in the house. The door opened almost instantly. Dante stood there fully dressed, a weapon already in hand, his expression sharp with the particular alertness of a man who had learned long ago never to sleep too deeply. His eyes moved from her face to Milo's, and understanding settled over his features immediately. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, though tension coiled visibly beneath the surface. "Salvatore's men," Lucia whispered. "They have Nico. I heard them say something about a vote, about whether the other lieutenants would back a move against you. They said if it does not go Nico's way, he does not leave this house alive. Dante's expression darkened, all traces of sleep vanishing entirely. He stepped back into the room, pulling a second weapon from a locked drawer near his bed, checking it with the quick, practiced efficiency of a man who had done this more times than he could count. "Stay behind me," he said, moving toward the door. "We are going to the safe room in the east wing. You will wait there with Milo while I deal with this." "Dante." Lucia caught his arm before he could move past her, her voice trembling but firm. "Be careful. Please." Something flickered across his face, brief but unmistakable, before he nodded once and led her quickly down the hallway, moving with a silent, deliberate caution that spoke to years of training in exactly this kind of danger. They passed two of his loyal guards along the way, men who fell into step behind them without a word, their weapons already drawn. The safe room, hidden behind a section of bookshelf in the East Wing library, was small but sturdy, reinforced with steel behind its wooden paneling. Dante guided Lucia and Milo inside, showing her quickly how to bolt the door from within. "Do not open this for anyone except me or Nico," he instructed. "If you hear fighting, stay away from the door. If it goes quiet for too long and no one comes, use the phone on the shelf to call the number written beside it. Do you understand?" Lucia nodded, her arms tightening around Milo as fear threatened to overwhelm her composure. "What if something happens to you?" Dante's expression softened just slightly in the dim light of the hidden room. "Then Nico knows what to do, and he will make sure you and Milo are protected no matter what happens to me. But nothing is going to happen to me tonight. I have far too much waiting for me on the other side of this door to let Salvatore take it away." He pulled the door shut before she could respond, and she heard the heavy click of the bolt sliding into place from outside, sealing her once again into a dark, quiet space while chaos gathered somewhere beyond it. She settled onto the small cot along the wall, holding Milo close, and waited, counting the passing minutes in the rhythm of her own unsteady heartbeat. Outside, in the hallways of the estate, Dante moved with lethal purpose toward the wing where Salvatore's men had been holding their late-night meetings. He found Nico first, bound and guarded by a single man near the old wine cellar, and dispatched the threat with a swift, silent efficiency that left no room for alarm to spread. Nico, freed and furious, filled him in quickly on what he had overheard before his capture, confirming that Salvatore had gathered support from two other lieutenants, though at least three more remained loyal, waiting only for a clear signal from Dante himself. "They are meeting in the West Study," Nico said, rubbing his wrists where the rope had bitten into his skin. "Salvatore believes you are too distracted to notice what he has been building. He is wrong." Dante's expression was carved from stone, every trace of the softness Lucia had witnessed in recent weeks folded away beneath the cold, calculating authority that had built his reputation in the first place. "Gather the loyal men, quietly. We end this tonight, before it spreads any further through the ranks." Inside the hidden room, Lucia had no way of knowing what unfolded beyond the heavy door, only the muffled echo of distant footsteps, and once, the faint, unmistakable sound of raised voices cut short by silence. She pressed Milo against her chest, rocking him gently even though he had already drifted into an uneasy sleep, more to steady her own nerves than his. Every minute stretched unbearably long, each one carrying the possibility that the door might open to Nico's familiar face, or to something far worse. She thought of the note left beneath her door weeks earlier, the warning she had dismissed as an idle threat, and wondered now whether it had come from Salvatore himself, an early signal of the storm that had finally broken loose tonight. She thought of Dante's words in the garden, the quiet admission that he was not ready to lose what her son had given back to him, and prayed, with a desperation she had not allowed herself to feel in years, that those words would not become the last honest thing he ever said to her. The phone on the shelf sat silent, and she resisted the urge to reach for it, remembering his instruction to wait, to trust that the silence beyond the door did not yet mean the worst had happened. She counted her own breaths instead, matching them to the steady rhythm of Milo's sleep, holding onto the fragile hope that when the door finally opened, it would be Dante standing on the other side, and not the end of everything they had carefully begun to build together. Dante moved through the darkened halls with Nico and 4 loyal men close behind him, their footsteps silent against the old stone floors, every one of them trained for exactly this kind of confrontation. Outside the West study, low voices carried through the closed door, Salvator's tone sharp and persuasive as he pressed the 2 wavering lieutenants toward his side. Morty is finished the moment word spreads that he chose comfort over control, Salvator was saying. We move tonight, before Nico can rally support against us. By morning, this territory answers to new leadership. Dante did not wait for further confirmation. He signaled Nico with a single sharp motion, and the study door burst open before Salvator or his men could reach for their weapons. What followed was fast and brutal, the kind of confrontation Dante had spent years perfecting, every movement economical, every decision made without hesitation. One of the wavering lieutenants dropped his weapon immediately, raising his hands in surrender, understanding too late which side of the conflict truly held power. The second fought briefly before Nico subdued him against the wall. Salvator alone refused to yield, lunging toward Dante with a blade drawn from his jacket, years of buried resentment finally breaking free into open violence. The fight that followed was short but vicious, both men trained too well for it to last long, until Dante finally disarmed him, pinning him against the heavy wooden desk with enough force to end any further resistance. The blade had caught Dante's side in the struggle, a shallow but bleeding wound along his ribs, though he barely acknowledged the pain, his focus entirely fixed on the man beneath him. You forget, Dante said, his voice low and lethal, that I did not build this from nothing by losing fights against men who think ambition is the same as strength. Salvator said nothing, his earlier confidence crumbling into the realization of what his betrayal would now cost him. Dante straightened, addressing Nico without looking away from the defeated lieutenant. Take him to holding. The other 2 remain under guard until I decide whether their loyalty is worth salvaging. By the time the confrontation ended and the study fell silent once more, dawn had already begun to soften the darkness outside the windows, and the immediate threat against Dante's leadership had been fully contained. It was only then, with the danger finally settled, that he allowed himself to think of the 2 people waiting anxiously behind a bolted door in the east wing, and made his way there immediately, ignoring the ache along his side in favor of reaching them as quickly as possible. The bolt slid free just before sunrise, and Lucia jolted upright, her arms tightening protectively around Milo as the heavy door swung open. Relief flooded through her at the sight of Nico standing there, a fresh bruise darkening along his jaw but otherwise steady on his feet. It is over, he said quietly. Salvator is no longer a problem. Dante wants to see you both, but he asked me to warn you first. He is not entirely unharmed. Her stomach dropped. How badly is he hurt? A cut along his ribs, nothing that will not heal. He would not let anyone tend to it properly until he knew you and the boy were safe. Nico offered a tired, faint smile. He has been standing outside this door for the last 10 minutes, refusing to let anyone else be the one to open it. Lucia found him waiting in the hallway, his shirt torn and stained, a rough bandage wrapped hastily around his midsection, but his eyes were clear and steady when they met hers. Whatever violence had unfolded through the night, it had ended with him standing, and in that moment nothing else mattered as much as that simple fact. You are hurt, she said, closing the distance between them, Milo still held against her hip. It looks worse than it is, Dante said, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. His gaze moved to Milo, who reached toward him with sleepy, unquestioning trust, entirely unaware of the danger that had passed through the house while he slept. Dante's expression softened as he brushed a gentle hand against the boy's hair. "You are both safe. That is all that matters right now." "What happened to Salvatore?" Lucia asked carefully. "He made his choice, and it was the wrong one," Dante said, his voice carrying a finality that discouraged further questions. "The men who stood against me have been dealt with. The ones who remained loyal understand now, without doubt, where my priorities lie." Later that morning, once his injuries had been properly treated, and the household had begun the slow work of settling back into order, Dante gathered the remaining staff and lieutenants in the front hall. Lucia stood at the back of the room with Milo, uncertain why Nico had insisted she be present, until Dante's eyes found hers across the crowded space and he began to speak. "Last night some among you chose to question my judgment, my priorities, and my right to decide what matters most to me," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "I do not intend to explain myself to anyone again, but I will say this plainly, so there is no confusion moving forward. Lucia Bennett and her son are not staff to be dismissed, and they are not weaknesses to be exploited. They are under my protection, completely and permanently, and anyone who threatens them threatens me directly." A murmur passed through the gathered staff, though no one dared voice open disagreement after the events of the previous night. Lucia felt her cheeks warm under the sudden weight of attention, uncertain how to respond to such an open declaration, made without hesitation in front of the entire household. "I know this is not the life either of you asked for," Dante said, his attention shifting fully toward her now, the formal address of the room falling away into something quieter, more personal. "I know I cannot promise a world without danger, but I can promise you will never face it without someone standing beside you, who is willing to burn everything down before letting harm reach you." Lucia's throat tightened with emotion she had spent weeks trying to guard against. She thought of every warning she had given herself since arriving at this estate, every careful reason to keep her distance from a man capable of such ruthless violence. Yet standing there, watching him speak with such open, unguarded honesty in front of people who could easily use the admission against him, she understood that this was not the same kind of danger she had fled from before. This was something else entirely, something built on protection rather than control, on choice rather than fear. The following days brought a quieter, steadier rhythm to the estate. With Salvatore's rebellion crushed and the remaining lieutenants firmly aligned behind Dante's leadership, the household settled into a calm it had not known in weeks. Repairs continued on the areas damaged during the earlier attacks, and slowly, carefully, life within the walls began to feel less like survival and more like something worth building toward. Lucia found herself spending more time with Dante beyond the careful boundaries of employer and staff, sharing quiet meals in the evening after Milo had gone to sleep, walking together through the garden while he told her stories of the estate's history, of Alina and Bianca, memories he had kept locked away for years, finally finding room to breathe in the presence of someone willing to listen without judgment. She told him, in turn, about her own past, about the fear that had defined her early years with Callum, about the long, uncertain road that had led her to this estate, believing she was only searching for safety and steady work. Neither of them rushed the process of understanding one another fully, content instead to let trust build slowly, carefully, in the space created by shared danger survive together. Nico, too, seemed to settle more easily into the new order of the household, his loyalty to Dante only strengthened by the events of that violent night. He took to checking on Lucia and Milo during his rounds, a habit that started as duty and slowly became something closer to genuine friendship. He taught Milo simple card games in the evenings, patient in a way that surprised Lucia given his reputation among the staff, and more than once she caught him sharing a quiet laugh with Dante over some small joke at the boy's expense, the kind of easy camaraderie that had been entirely absent from the house in her earliest weeks there. The staff, too, adjusted gradually to the new reality. Grazia, who had once whispered nervously about strange happenings in the garden, now greeted Lucia openly in the hallways, no longer troubled by rumors that had settled comfortably into accepted fact. Greta remained a steady, grounding presence, offering practical wisdom whenever Lucia found herself uncertain how to navigate the strange new shape her life had taken, reminding her gently that trust rebuilt after violence was never meant to happen quickly, only steadily, one honest day at a time. Word reached them eventually that the remaining Rixai influence in the region had crumbled entirely following Salvator's failed rebellion, the family unable to capitalize on internal division that no longer existed. Dante's position, rather than weakened by the events of that night, emerged stronger than before, his authority reinforced by the swift, decisive way he had handled both the external threat and the betrayal within his own ranks. The other families in the territory took notice, and for the first time in longer than Dante could remember, the estate settled into a genuine, sustainable peace, rather than the fragile, watchful quiet he had grown used to living within. It was nearly a month after Salvator's betrayal that Dante found her in the garden on a warm afternoon, Milo napping soundly in the nursery under Greta's watchful care. He approached the oak tree where she sat, the same tree that had first brought them together in such an unexpected, fearless collision of two guarded lives. "I have been thinking about that first morning," he said, settling onto the grass beside her. "I was so certain, closing my eyes beneath this tree, that I wanted nothing more than silence and distance from everyone around me. I did not expect a boy with no fear in his heart to climb onto my chest and remind me what it felt like to have something worth protecting." Lucia smiled, watching sunlight filter gently through the branches above them. "I was certain I would lose my position that very morning. I never imagined it would lead to this." "Neither did I," Dante admitted. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the small wooden horse, its paint even more chipped now from months of play, and turned it over gently in his hands before offering it back to her. "I kept this after that first day. I told myself it was simply an oversight, that I forgot to return it sooner. The truth is, I could not bring myself to let it go. It reminded me of the exact moment everything I thought I understood about my own life began to change." Lucia took the small toy carefully, her fingers brushing his as she did, and felt the weight of everything unspoken between them finally settle into something clear and certain. "Milo has always been braver than either of us gives him credit for," she said softly. "Maybe that is exactly what this family needed." "Family?" Dante repeated the word slowly, as if testing its shape for the first time in years. "I like the sound of that more than I expected to." He reached for her hand then, his fingers closing gently around hers, and neither of them pulled away. The garden around them remained quiet, peaceful. The danger that had once threatened to consume everything they were building finally settled into something manageable, something survivable, guarded now by loyalty rebuilt and trust earned through fire rather than words alone. When Milo woke from his nap and toddled out into the garden a short while later, wooden horse forgotten somewhere in the nursery, he found his mother and the man he had claimed as his own from that very first morning sitting together beneath the old oak tree, hands joined, expressions soft with something Milo was too young to name, but old enough to recognize as safety. He ran toward them without hesitation, as he always did, climbing eagerly into the space between them, and this time, neither Dante nor Lucia needed to pretend to be anything other than exactly what they had become. A family, built not from the absence of danger, but from the courage to protect what mattered most in spite of it. Above them, the old oak tree stood as it always had, its wide branches casting the same gentle shade that had once sheltered a tired, guarded man pretending to sleep away the weight of a violent world. Now it sheltered something entirely different, a quiet, hard-won peace built by a fearless toddler who had never once doubted that beneath every hardened exterior, there was still a heart worth reaching for. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Dante Morty was not pretending to rest beneath its branches at all. He was simply, finally, at peace. As the afternoon stretched on, Greta arrived with a small tray of lemonade and biscuits, setting it down on the grass with a knowing smile before retreating quietly back toward the house, leaving the small family to their quiet moment beneath the tree. Milo abandoned his place between them almost immediately, drawn instead toward the biscuits, and Lucia laughed softly at his single-minded determination, the sound easy and unguarded in a way it had not been in years. Dante watched her laugh with an expression of quiet wonder, as though still adjusting to the idea that joy, ordinary and unremarkable as it seemed to everyone else, could belong to him too. He thought of Bianca then, not with the sharp, consuming grief that had defined so many years of his life, but with a gentler kind of remembrance, the sense that honoring her memory did not require him to remain frozen in the moment he lost her. She would have been about Milo's age, full of the same fearless curiosity, and he liked to think, watching the boy chase crumbs across the blanket with delighted focus, that some part of her would have approved of the family slowly taking root in her absence. "You are somewhere else," Lucia observed gently, noticing the distant look in his eyes. "Just thinking," he said, "that some things break beyond repair, and other things, given enough time and the right people, find a way to grow again anyway." She reached for his hand once more, and this time Milo noticed, climbing determinedly back into the space between them, insisting with a series of insistent, wordless sounds that he be included in whatever quiet understanding had passed between the two adults he trusted most in the world. Dante lifted him easily, settling him against his chest the same way he had that very first morning, though everything about the moment felt entirely different now, no longer an accident of fate but a choice made freely, again and again, by a man who had finally allowed himself to want something soft enough to lose. The sun continued its slow arc across the sky, gilding the garden in warm afternoon light, and beneath the old oak tree, the three of them remained together, unhurried, unafraid, held together by a bond forged first in an accidental moment of trust and tempered afterward by fire, loyalty, and the quiet, deliberate choice to keep choosing each other, no matter what dangers the world beyond the estate walls might still hold in store.